July 7th, 1944. German intelligence called the American infantry a limited force, solid on defense but incapable of going on offense. That assumption cost them everything. Think about it. A commander who had stopped every single American assault for 6 straight weeks, who had held the line at Omaha Beach, who had fortified high ground, registered artillery, and battle-hardened troops. How wrong could a commander like that actually be? St. Lo answered that question, and the answer hit the German 7th Army like an earthquake. The real question is, what did the Americans change and why couldn't the Germans see it coming? General Major Dietrich Kreis, commander of the 352nd Infantry Division, reported directly to 84th Corps. The Americans are brave, but they don't think. They telegraph their intentions with artillery, then come straight at you, and when they take losses, they pull back. St. Lo will break them. He wrote that without a single doubt, and he had reasons to believe it. The 352nd Division had stopped the American landing at Omaha Beach. They'd held their position at Carentan through 8 days of intense combat. Now they were in St. Lo, an ancient town sitting on high ground where 7 major roads converged, surrounded on all sides by hedgerows, those natural walls that turned the fields of Normandy into killing grounds. Kreis was certain the Americans would wear themselves out there, just like they had for the past 5 weeks. What he didn't know was that the Americans had started to learn. Since D-Day, the American infantry's average daily advance was just 800 yards, and that was against full resistance. Their doctrine was built on firepower, not maneuver. At Carentan, the 29th Infantry Division lost 2,000 men taking a town the Germans had already abandoned. At La Diffuse, the 90th Division took 5,000 casualties in 12 days and moved forward just 3 miles. German intelligence kept seeing the same pattern over and over. Announce the attack with artillery, advance in the open during the day, pull back when the first assault fails. The 352nd Division stopped 8 American assaults in 4 weeks, 18 times, and 18 times they succeeded. Kreis spread his 3 regiments around St. Lo in layered defensive belts. He registered artillery on every road. He mined every route. Then he waited for the same standard 12-hour artillery preparation the Americans always used. Major Thomas Howe had something else in mind. July 11, 1944, 4:15 in the morning. Howe stood in a hedgerow 2,000 yards from St. Lo, looking at the ground he had to cross in 90 minutes. His unit, 3rd Battalion, 116th Infantry, 29th Division, had been given a mission the Germans were convinced the Americans would never attempt: infiltrate German lines at night. No artillery, no tanks, no roads. Just 800 riflemen moving through the dark through hedgerow country with one objective: Hill 122 on the eastern side of St. Lo, taken before dawn. Howe's operations order was just 8 words: move quietly, bypass resistance, take the objective. This plan went against every documented pattern German intelligence had on the Americans. That was exactly the point. At 5:20 a.m., the battalion moved out. 3 companies, single file, through gaps that combat engineers had cut through the hedgerows the night before. No talking, no cigarettes, no metal rattling. Recon patrols had spent 4 nights crawling through the area, counting sentries, marking minefields, cutting the routes. The lead company passed within feet of a German machine gun post. Feet. And they never heard a thing. The same hedgerows that had stopped the American advance for weeks were now hiding them. 1,200 yards in the dark, 3 prepared defensive positions bypassed. By 6:10 a.m., they were at the base of Hill 122. That's when German sentries spotted movement and opened fire. Howe didn't stop. 2 companies pushed up the hill. The 3rd held down the German positions below, pinning them, while the assault elements kept climbing. The German 916th Grenadier Regiment was on that hill, waiting for an attack from the north after the usual artillery prep. But the American infantry came from the northwest, in the dark, without a single shell fired first. Division headquarters got the first report at 6:25 a.m. Enemy infantry on the hill. Numbers unknown. Method of approach unknown. Positions being overrun. Kreis immediately ordered a counterattack, but he'd positioned his reserves for a northern assault, not a flank infiltration. By the time his companies could reorient, Howie's battalion was already on top of Hill 122, with machine guns and mortars they'd carried up through the dark themselves, and the German artillery that had been pre-registered there was now firing at the wrong coordinates. At 7:40 a.m., two companies from the 916th charged up, straight at the American positions. 20 minutes later, the attack collapsed, 80 casualties. Kreis committed a battalion from the 914th Grenadier Regiment. That assault got within 100 yards of Howie's command post. Then, interlocking machine gun fire stopped it cold. The Americans weren't pulling back. They weren't trying to escape through artillery fire. They were holding ground that German doctrine said light infantry couldn't take or hold without armor. 140 of Howie's men were killed or wounded, and still they held that hill. That's when the whole tactical picture changed. Hill 122 overlooked Saint-Lô from the east, the positions Kreis thought were safe because the Americans always came from the north. Now, American artillery observers could finally see what they needed to see. By 10:15 a.m., 105mm howitzers started targeting German artillery batteries that German gunners had considered untouchable, because forward observers were now looking directly at them. Kreis's counterfire was useless. His batteries were registered on the northern roads. At 11:30 a.m., he ordered a withdrawal from his eastern positions. The perimeter had to shrink or face encirclement. The Americans hadn't announced their attack. They'd slipped inside, taken the key terrain, and used positional advantage to force a German withdrawal, not firepower superiority. Major Howie didn't see that withdrawal. At 8:20 a.m., he was directing defensive fire from his command post when German artillery killed him. Captain William Punteny took command and held Hill 122 through 3 more counterattacks. By the night of July 11th, the hill was in American hands. The 29th Division exploited the gap. 2 more battalions pushed through the opening Howie had cleared, and by nightfall, they were 1,500 yards inside Saint-Lô's eastern defensive belt. German resistance, which had been so effective for 6 weeks, started cracking against attacks that came without warning, without preparatory fire, and from directions no one expected. On July 15th, the 2nd Infantry Division hit Saint-Lô from the north. Same infiltration tactics, same night movement, same bypassing of strong points, same seizure of key terrain first. By July 17th, American infantry was inside Saint-Lô, inside positions the Germans had set up to defend from outside the city. On July 18th, Kreis committed his last reserve, in a counterattack. 2 blocks were retaken. Then artillery directed from Hill 122 shut it down. The 352nd Division, the one that had defended Omaha Beach, the one that had dominated the Normandy hedgerows for 6 weeks, was coming apart. Companies were down to 40% strength. Ammunition resupply stopped because American artillery was hitting supply routes that 4 days earlier weren't even on anyone's radar. On July 18th, Saint-Lô fell. The 29th and 35th Infantry Divisions seized what was left. Only sporadic German rearguard resistance remained. Kreis requested permission to retreat to defensive lines in the rear. 7th Army said no. Then, 6 hours later, when American forces moved to encircle the city, the order was reversed. The 352nd Division slipped out in the night, broken, leaving equipment behind, leaving wounded behind, in fragmented formations under the shadow of American artillery. The same division that had stood firm at Omaha Beach, the same one that had held the Americans to 800 yards a day, lost Saint-Lô in 8 days, to tactics they never saw coming. The captured German 7th Army after-action report from Avranches states, American infantry demonstrated tactical flexibility not previously observed. Night infiltration, bypassing of strong points, rapid exploitation of seized terrain, and infantry-artillery coordination without mass preparatory fire. This represents a doctrinal shift we did not anticipate. The previous assessment of American offensive capability must be immediately revisited. The revision came too late. Across Normandy through late July, American infantry kept adopting infiltration tactics. German defensive doctrine, which depended on predictable American frontal assaults, broke down the moment the Americans stopped being predictable. The 29th Infantry Division took 3,000 casualties taking Saint-Lô. The 352nd Infantry Division took 5,000 defending it. The city still fell. By July 25th, they were no longer an effective fighting force. On July 19th, Major Howie's body was brought into Saint-Lô and placed on the rubble of Sainte Croix Church. His battalion, without artillery support, slipping through German lines in the dark, broke the defensive pattern that had stopped the American advance for 6 weeks.
The Germans had called the Americans predictable and rigid. That assessment was 5 weeks old. It got them killed. Saint-Lô proved that tactical adaptation beats static doctrine, no matter how successful that doctrine has been. The Germans correctly identified American patterns, but they never accounted for institutional learning. That mistake cost them the main anchor of the Normandy defense. If you want more stories like this, where tactics change the outcome of wars, where thinking beat firepower, subscribe and turn on notifications. The next piece of history is already waiting for you.